The Reagan propaganda that we've been seeing recently has brought to light a lot of interesting things about Ronald Reagan. We just surpassed it would have been his 100th birthday. And there was a lot of media surrounding I guess it's the reopening or just a ribbon cutting took place at his presidential library. And we saw news networks flying there to cover it. And for a while, we've been talking, Lewis, about how Ronald Reagan has been, to many conservatives over the last few years, somewhat of a hero, someone that they point back to and say, if we could only have a Reagan Republican. Mm-hmm. And it's even gone further than that. I mean, candidates are compared to Ronald Reagan in many ways. Ronald Reagan has become almost a de facto standard for current Republican candidates. How conservative are they relative to Ronald Reagan? How much do they represent true conservatism with Ronald Reagan as the barometer? And Think Progress, and really there are a lot of these, but the one I looked at most recently is Think Progress. And they pointed out there's a lot about Ronald Reagan that, number one, is not conservative, but number two, just doesn't seem to even be the collective amnesia that we've been talking about of the Republican Party. It is very clear when we talk about Ronald Reagan. I mean, on tax cuts, although Ronald Reagan did famously, as we hear from conservatives, decrease the marginal tax rate. Many people don't even get that it is a marginal rate on the top income earners. He raised taxes 11 times. State spending nearly doubled under Ronald Reagan. And we hear hedging when conservatives are confronted with these facts. They say, well, the situation was one where he didn't really have much of a choice. Fine. But let's use that same standard when we talk about things Barack Obama has had to do. If we're going to talk about the situation was such that he had no choice but to stray from his ideals or his campaign talking points, let's allow everybody that. Let's allow that to everybody.
Right. Let Obama do what he has to do because of our deficit.
That's right. And speaking of deficit, Ronald Reagan almost tripled the federal budget deficit. The debt increased by nearly $3 trillion, roughly 3 times as much as the first 80 years of the century had done altogether. Again, the conservative myth is tax cuts and decreasing the deficit. Let's put the map up if we have it, please, in the back. This is the deficit, and you can see very clearly over time, Bush-Reagan explosion of the deficit and an almost complete elimination under Bill Clinton. If you want to hedge on one of them by saying, hey, it was the times, let's allow that latitude to everybody. What's your reaction to this, Lewis? Do we have an unfair and double standard when it comes to what people are handed, what presidents are handed when they come into office?
Well, clearly.
All right. Well, we've heard it from Lewis. Thank you, Lewis. Unemployment. Unemployment soared after Reagan's 1981 tax cuts. We hear all the time, you cut taxes, you reduce unemployment. At face value, we know it is absurd. Everybody we talk to who is hiring people, from small businesses where the owner makes $50,000 up to multi-million-dollar CEOs, tax cuts don't drive demand, and they don't drive hiring. Tax cuts for the rich, that is, particularly, which is the only place Reagan really cut taxes. They went up multiple times elsewhere. You're going to hire people because you get a 3 percentage point tax cut at the very top? No. The people who are buying your products won't have any extra money. So, and this list goes on and on. Reagan grew the size of the federal government tremendously. He did very little to fight against legal and safe abortions. Many conservatives point to Ronald Reagan as a pro-life advocate. He actually signed in the bill in California that liberalized the state's abortion laws. And it goes on. He talks in his memoirs about wanting a world free of nuclear weapons. He gave amnesty to 3 million undocumented immigrants. What about calling the amnesty program now, when it's discussed, the Reagan program? What's the real difference? This is the program that Reagan used years ago. You're not going to hear any of that from conservatives who tout Ronald Reagan's conservative credentials. What do you make of this, Lewis?
Well, if people are using him as the barometer, I guess it's still fair to use him as a barometer for what he stood for and what he wanted to do, and what his plans were.
even though he didn't do any of it.
That must be it. That must be what people are comparing themselves to.
So let's just use campaign. In that case, Lewis, let's take it a step further. Even though Rand Paul campaigned on no more earmarks and no more spending and eliminate the Department of Education, he's not going to do any of those things. But from now on, we will refer to those proposals. The no more earmarks proposal, that's the Rand Paul proposal. And people will say, well, hold on a second. Rand Paul didn't do it. He didn't do that. He didn't do any of those things. No, but he campaigned on it. Mm-hmm. That's what politicians are so inherently liars that we don't even judge proposals by what politicians do, simply what they campaign on.
25 years from now, who knows how people will look at Rand Paul.
All right. He is the earmark guy. Mm-hmm. What can we do?